Again, my name's Blair Allen, the Manager of Transit Development with Grand River Transit. And joining me today are the project consultants with Dillon Consulting who will be presenting today. I will pass off to their team so they can introduce themselves, then Dillon will go over our agenda and carry on with the presentation. So Jacob, over to you.
Good evening and welcome to everyone joining us. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. As Blair mentioned, my name is Jacob Terry and I'm a transit planner with Dillon Consulting. With us as well as Dennis Carr, a partner in transit planning lead with Dillon, who is the consulting project manager for the township transit strategy. So let's get into the agenda for this evening. Following the introductions, we will have a presentation from Dennis on the project overview and design of township transit services. Then we will have some polling and questions to you in our audience on your thoughts on how transit service could be designed in North Dumfries. Dennis will then share the overview of the service delivery options, and we'll have a discussion on those. We will then share a bit more on the next steps for the project and have time for questions towards the end of the session. We understand that there may be different perspectives on the desire for transit in North Dumfries, and we encourage you to share your input in a respectful way so we can have a meaningful discussion tonight. I will now hand it over to Dennis to get started on the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Appreciate the introduction. Once again, my name is Dennis Carr, and I'm a partner and transit planner at Dillon Consulting, and I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about the township transit strategy that we're currently in the process of undertaking. If you go to the next slide. So every project has a vision and what we're trying to accomplish. So the vision for this study is to expand and enhance existing township transit services to effectively and efficiently meet the mobility needs of Waterloo Region's township residents. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to determine the potential value of transit within your community and what that could look like in a way that sort of meets the overall requirements of its residents. To fulfill this vision, we have a number of different project goals that we're looking to undertake. First thing we're going to do is we're going to establish where the highest demand for public transit services exists. So understanding what the overall travel patterns are, where you're traveling internally, when you're exiting North Dumfries and which communities that you're going to, what is that potential demand for people to switch to a transit mode. We'll then look to understand what are the potential benefits of a transit service. So how could this potential transit service benefit particular members of the community, whether it's individuals that are aging, newcomers to the community, people who want to leave their car at home for all trips or certain trips. What are those potential benefits and how can we design a system that helps meet those overall benefits? Understanding that transit is not going to be for everybody, but how does it benefit the community as a whole? Taking that information, including the information that we collect from data review, that we collect from these initial surveys, and this public open house, we'll design a transit service for each township and develop an implementation plan of how to sort of carry that forward. So those are our overall project goals and some of the steps that we're going to take in developing the service plan. So in terms of timeline, we've been engaged in this project for a little bit now and working with the region to conduct a background review and develop some preliminary concepts for each of the townships. So once again, that background review looks at existing data, population, key areas of interest or destinations of interest, travel patterns, and we've developed that into some concept plans. We're here today in our first round of engagement to talk to you about what are your views and values around transit, what's your level of support, and what your thoughts are on some of those preliminary concept plans. And that's being supported by a couple of stakeholder interviews, as well as the community survey, which is out now, which if you haven't already, I encourage you to take. It's available on the GRT website. Once we get that feedback and comment from everybody, we'll refine those plans based on your feedback and comments and develop a preferred service plan and design, which we'll then take to a second round of engagement, once again to elicit some of your feedback and comments. That will then be refined into a final service design and we'll make a recommendation to regional council. So that's the timeline, and those are some of the major steps that we're undertaking for this project. Next slide. So let's talk about transit services in general. And when we first start to talk about transit, I always like to begin with what is the benefit of transit, or what is the need for transit that any community can experience, once again, whether you use it or whether you don't use it. First of all, one of the benefits of transit is it helps address the affordability concerns, particularly with rising costs of living. So, if you think about turning a 3-car household into a 2-car household, 2-car into a 1-car, or 1-car into a no-car, having a mobility option available for you to make some of those trips without a vehicle can reduce that overall cost of living and help accommodate for rising affordability concerns, particularly around housing. It provides access to hospitals, medical appointments, employment, training, education, whether it's individuals that use it 5 days a week or individuals that use it 1 day a week or once a month. It provides access to some of these needed appointments and opportunities to live life within your community. It provides options to participate in recreation activities and access points of interest in the township, both for visitors and residents. It addresses greater concern over sustainability and protecting the natural environment. So we can increase the number of passengers per vehicle and reduce the number of single occupant vehicles on the road and reduce overall emission. Then that provides one of the benefits that transit can provide. It accommodates an increase in people choosing not to own an automobile or to delay getting their driver's license, which we're seeing more and more, particularly with a younger generation, and addresses increased congestion, particularly as you're heading into the larger urban centers and you're seeing that congestion build up. So there's lots of benefits that a transit system in a community can provide. But there's also some challenges that we have to address when we're, looking at what does transit service look like. And when you think about what a traditional transit service looked like, our minds always turn to what's available in Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge, sort of large vehicles operating on sort of denser corridors that are fairly frequent. And that's because a lot of these urban systems thrive on density and population density in large corridors. That doesn't exist in a lot of township areas, or particularly in the more rural parts. And so we have to adapt to different service models that aren't tied to that same level of density that doesn't exist, because our real objective is to provide that mobility and accessibility options for individuals. We have limited pedestrian infrastructure to access stops, and many services and amenities are located outside of the townships, requiring long distance of travel. So these are all considerations that we're aware of and things that we take into account. And we don't apply a cookie cutter solution that you would see in a larger urban center into one of the townships. We adapt the model to be more reflective of the environment in which we're operating. Next slide. So when we're thinking about what are the options that are available for transit service, we first start to look at service area options. So, how do we serve the township? So there's several different models that we can see that are used in other sort of township and more rural areas. There's a township-wide service, which provides access to some form of transit vehicle. Doesn't matter where you live within the township. So it could be within the more urbanized area, or could be in a sort of a more distant rural area. It provides that access anywhere within the township. You could have a township local service, where, for example, you may just have a vehicle that's provided in the more urban area of a township, such as Ayr, or you can have an urban connector, which would connect the urban municipalities or the urban communities within the township to a larger urban municipality. So those are the three kind of service models or service area models that we considered when we're doing this assessment. There's also different models for routing. We have our traditional fixed route, on-demand service, and flex route. Now I'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. So the most common type of transit service that you'll see is a fixed route option. And this is a traditional bus that follows a scheduled path and corridor. And those vehicles operate on that same corridor at sort of a similar interval every time. And passengers are required to travel from where they live or their destination to a fixed stop to board that vehicle on that fixed schedule. So these fixed route options are best suited for areas that have consistent demand and travel patterns and a little bit higher density, so more of the urbanized areas, and not typically as well suited for a very low density area. So you might see these as connecting urban communities within a broader rural or township area or within a larger urbanized area. The next type of service that we see is on-demand transit. And this is a shared ride service that does not have a fixed route or a fixed schedule, but operates within a defined service area within standard hours of operation. So the way this works is, as a customer wanting to use this service, you would either call in to a call center or use your mobile phone to request a ride. The mobile app would identify what trips are available to you, and you would select the ride that you would want to take, including the destination you wanted to go to and the time you wanted to get picked up. This is a shared ride service. So the driver pick up or drop off other passengers along the way, but the route would be dynamic and it would be flexible, whereas it would pick the shortest path based on the people that are in the vehicle and their individual origins and destinations. So it always wouldn't follow the same fixed route. And these type of services are best suited for more rural areas or during time periods or areas where there's lower demand. So an example of this, it already exists within the region of Waterloo, and that's in the Breslau community where an on-demand service exists in Woolwich. Next slide. So again, this is just another example of how you as a customer would book that service. You would start by identifying, calling or using your computer or mobile phone to request a ride, your start point, your end point, your desired pickup time. The options available would become known to you. You would select the one that's most appropriate. You would get picked up at a designated stop or at your home, depending on where you are, at the time that's been identified, and you would get dropped off either at your destination if it's within the zone or at a transfer point where you can complete the rest of your ride on a fixed route service if it's more of a long distance trip. The final route typology that we look at is called a flex route, and this is something that's currently in place in Wilmot Township, which provides a service from Waterloo through Baden and into New Hamburg. So with that route, it operates as a fixed route on a scheduled time, but when it reaches New Hamburg, there are a couple of stops that don't get a lot of frequent passenger pickup, and maybe just a couple of times a day. So this type of route provides you an opportunity to request a pickup point along one of those flex routes if you want to reduce your walking distance to your home. But that vehicle wouldn't go there every single time. So if there's no request or a pickup or a drop off, that vehicle wouldn't travel in those flex portions of the route. So that's what that flex route is. And that typically works best where you have the need for a fixed route, but there's a need to potentially go into certain areas that don't get a lot of trip requests. And it's that ability to extend into those routes only when required. And finally, the other option that we look at is in terms of overall vehicle types. So there's lots of different vehicle types that we can use for a transit service. What most people are familiar with is the 40-foot bus that you see in Waterloo, Kitchener, and Cambridge. That's your standard transit vehicle that seats withstandees around 50 to 60 passengers and is used where there's a higher travel demand. But there's also smaller vehicles that are used for the service. So for a fixed route or a flex route, we might use a 40-foot bus if there's high demand. But if there's low demand, we might go to a smaller passenger vehicle, such as a cutaway, which you see on the top, which is a much smaller vehicle that maybe fits 12 to 15 passengers in it. And both vehicles are accessible, accommodating individuals with mobility aids. When you get into on-demand service, you would typically see either sort of a cutaway or a modified sort of van service that is also accessible with sort of a lower seated capacity. So the vehicle type also varies in terms of what type of service you provide and what the overall demand is. Now, with anything, it's important to understand that when we're making decisions, transit service planning is also about understanding what the trade-offs are. So in many cases, if you have a limited resource and we have to decide what's the most effective way to spend that resource, we have to decide based on public input and based on the data that we have, what's the best opportunity to meet the needs of the residents that we're trying to serve. So we may decide that resource should focus on settlement areas and maybe providing more service or a better level of service in places like Ayr, but not going into the more rural areas of the township. Or we may decide that, no, we think that there should be a focus also on the rural areas of the township, but if we take that same resource, it gets spread a little bit thin, so that may mean less service all around because we're sort of spreading that resource around to a bigger geographic area. As we go through, there's other trade-offs that we make and consider. We may decide to focus only on trips within the local township, or we may decide to focus on trips that travel outside of the townships and are intercommunity trips. We may decide to extend hours of service to include evenings and weekends, or we may decide to focus on providing higher frequency service during core operating hours. And finally, we may decide to ensure that fares remain very low, or we may decide to increase fares a little bit and have revenue available to provide more service. So these are some of the service decisions and trade-offs that we make when we're developing these plans. So I'll take a pause right now. So just a bit of a Transit 101 and sort of what we're trying to accomplish with the study, what we're still trying to accomplish in terms of gathering your feedback. And we want to turn this back to you with another poll in terms of what matters to you in designing for transit service. So I'll turn it back over to Jacob, who will lead our poll.
Yes, I will launch the first one. So first, we want to know what matters to you in transit design. It says Wellesley, but that means North Dumfries. So do you support the expansion of transit service in North Dumfries? And if a transit service was available to meet your needs, would you use it? Right. Let's see, answered, I think. So mixed support for expansion of transit service in North Dumfries. And if service was available, similarly, about half and half would consider using it versus not using it. So that's the first findings. I'm going to launch the next one now. Next, you want to know about your values. So in your opinion, which values are most important if you were to use transit in North Dumfries? Please select the two that are most important to you. Right. Different things that people are looking for. Good connections to other transit is the key one that is spoken out. Accessible vehicles and stops, low fares, frequent service, direct service, things that are really sticking out among this group. So thank you for sharing that. One person does have their hand up, so I will unmute you and you can ask your question. Peggy, I believe.
Hi, yes. Transit for evenings
Yeah,
and
we can.
weekends.
Pardon?
You mentioned transit for evenings and weekends.
Yep.
When we're talking about evenings, can you give me an idea of what that represents? Because for for the people that are out at the 401 Business Center, Earl Thompson Road is an example at Faro, which is what I'm here for representing. We have shifts that go until midnight. Is that going to fit into this plan?
Yeah, I can take that on, and Blair, if you have any other comments afterwards, feel free to answer. But it's certainly something that we're going to be looking at. When we're trying to understand what the demand is, you know, are there a significant amount of shift workers or people that desire that later evening service that again would result in that service being required. And one thing I mentioned that during my presentation is transit is all about trade-offs and trying to figure out what's the best use of that resource to spend. And so if we think there's a significant demand in the evenings where that service will be utilized, then that may be the shift of where we put that service. But if there's not as much of a demand and that resource is better utilized during the daytime, because that's when it's going to capture the highest amount of benefit to individuals, and maybe that's where we put it. So this is sort of early days in terms of deciding how we utilize that resource. But any input that you have on, you know, what that travel demand is, you know, how many people are getting off at that shift time, what that potential to use transit is always helpful for us and provides a lot of good feedback to us when we're developing the service plan.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, because we do struggle from time to time because, you know, we are out in the rural area. You know, we've had many people, you know, we're always looking for, you know, good people to come and work. And unfortunately, because of where we are, transit doesn't come here. So it does hinder some people's, you know, ability to take on a position. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Blair, I don't know if you had any further comments or you're good.
No, I'm basically good. Yeah, and what we want to hear from people, from Peggy and others, is when do they want to see the service, and that will help us make some of those decisions. And I know we've looked at that location in the past and recognize there are quite a number of people at that location, and how we can best serve them is something we want to determine and what we can best can do.
Okay.
Blair, Dennis, thanks for your question. We have one other question from Darcy. You're free to talk, Darcy.
Hi. Yes, I just have a question. If there is on-demand buses, I was reading that a lot of times the transfers don't work very well. If you're going from, you know, if you're transferring to a different bus route. Can you elaborate about that, please?
Blair, if you don't mind, if you want to speak specifically to how it works in Breslau.
Yeah, and I can talk, like, part of what the challenge obviously, as you say, the transfers for any routes. When you transfer, there's a bit of a challenge, and what we try to do is minimize that wait and make that as good as we can. And part of it with an on-demand will be, the key can be is where are you connecting and how are you connecting, where are you making those meets. So we would look at part of that to make sure that those transfers can be as good as possible, recognizing that there's some variability in the times that you're going to have. And Dennis probably has some more experience in different communities where he's worked on them and how they've sort of dealt with that issue elsewhere.
Yeah, there's lots of different options in dealing with it, right? And part of it is identifying where we have our transfer points. And so, you know, where the transfer points are in more urban areas, we typically put it in areas where there's routes that have higher frequency service. So if you miss one connection, there's another one. There are things that you can do that maybe get you there, you know, 5 minutes early, just to make sure if there's any variability in the schedule that you won't miss your ride. And there's different things that you can do in the software to sort of minimize those misconnections as well. So those are all things that we, you know, sort of continue to work on as we sort of introduce this new.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
I'll take the next two questions and then we will continue onwards. So first I will get Daryl. I think your hand was up first. Daryl, you're unmuted.
Hi, I'd just like to thank you for doing this presentation tonight and making all the residents of the townships aware of what you are proposing. To me, it sounds like that this is going to be a done deal, that transit is going to be coming to the village of Ayr. So we should just select the best prospect or the best situation that we think would fit the village. I've been a resident of Ayr for 30 years. And the reason why I moved out to Ayr 30 years ago was to get that small town feeling, to get away from the big communities, right? So with the transit coming to Ayr, I feel that we are going to lose our small town. We know we are in a process of change in this village here right now. We are seeing row houses go up, developments coming in. We can see that, right? I do agree with having transit coming out to the Bendalls and all that area out there. But as far as the transit coming into town here, I'm a little bit skeptical of how it's going to come in. You've focused on the positives of having transit come out to Ayr, but I think you've neglected in having the negatives being highlighted as well, right? There's a lot of residents that have lived out here for many, many years and are opposed to having the transit come out to this area. And I've raised my family, my kids, we moved out here when my kids were 3 and 5, and we got by without the transit. We knew what we were getting into, that there was no public transit that would go into Cambridge or into Kitchener. And we made do, right? It was a little bit of a hassle. Yes, I agree that it was a hassle, and at times it put us out, but we made do and we knew what we were getting into when we moved out here. I agree with having the on demand for the people who live in Kirkwood apartments and retirement homes around the area. I think it's a very good idea for that. But as far as having transit come out here on a daily basis or an hourly basis, whatever is decided, but it feels to me that this is going to be a done deal one way or the other. We're just going through the process of it, right? For the community to speak out. And I just feel that you're going to get a lot of unwanted, unsavory people that could be coming out here. If you look in the area of Galt, it would probably go into Galt, and you go into the bottom end of Galt there, and there's just a lot of unsavory people that live out there. And I have a feeling that a lot of that may come out to the village of Ayr, right? I know we're in, like I said, we're in a process of change in this area, but as residents that we moved out here many, many years ago, we all knew what we were getting into, right? So if we want transit, I feel we should keep the transit into the city. The people who want transit, they can go to the city, but we all knew what we were getting into. I agree with the Kirkwoods and everything like that, and maybe out to the Bendalls and that. But as far as coming into the city on a daily basis, I totally am against it. Thank you very much.
Dennis or Blair, if you have any comment. And thank you
Yeah,
for the question.
and
Daryl.
I'll just make briefly, thank you for your comments. And again, feel free to make those. And for anybody, fill in the survey comments, which will be collated and put together. We are doing a review of transit into all the townships right now. Ultimately, it is council that will be the decision makers on this, and we'll present the concepts to them, and they'll make the final call on how we proceed. So regional council will make that decision at some point, and all these views will be considered as part of that. And they'll be listening to what and reviewing it to determine what they feel is the best direction.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Daryl. And then the other question that I believe Jim had their hand raised, so I will. You are welcome to ask your question.
I agree with Daryl 100% on this. Also, you just said regional council. Does our township council not have a say?
Transit in the region of Waterloo is provided by the regional level of government, what typically, but at the same time, the mayor of North Dumfries, Sue Foxton, sits on council, and we also will hear input from your council. They don't make the decisions on this, but when any of the other townships where we have provided service, I've been out at meetings with them and discussed on it and have the input. So, and we'll look at what and their views, and we'll have some obviously stay on it, but it is a regional decision at the end of the day.
Mayor Foxton has raised her hand, so I will give her the floor as well.
Thank you. I'm listening to all the comments in the last two speakers as well. I sort of agree with Daryl that the on-demand thing may be a good idea, but a lot of factors go into this. Not only the frequency, the need for the 401 route is a definite, and also we have to figure out the costs. So I will strongly recommend, once we have all the information, including your comments, that's why I'm here to listen tonight, to make the best decision for you. So, you know, send council your emails, send them to me so that I have a good feeling of what the people want. Thanks.
I'm gonna ask that we have another question, but I'm gonna ask that we wait until the next Q&A session. Maybe we can go over the next things we have in here, and then I'll pull up some more questions afterwards. So I'm gonna throw this back to you, Dennis.
Okay, great. Okay, so really appreciate all of this feedback and input that we're receiving, and yes, you know, part of what we're going to be looking at is what is the demand, what is the benefit, what are the potential challenges, how do we address some of those challenges, particularly if there are concerns. So these are all things that we're going to look into as we sort of identify what transit could look like if it was recommended within the township. So for now, I'm going to go over what are some potential options that we have considered, and get your sort of advice on, or get your opinion on sort of what you think may work for you. So the first thing we looked at was a potential fixed route service that would connect some of the more sort of urban parts of the township into the urban area of the region of Waterloo. So what you'll see on this slide is a fixed route service that runs from Ayr. We don't know what the hours of service are. We don't know how frequent it would be sort of at this point in time. But what we're trying to identify is if there was a fixed route service that would connect into some of the more populated areas within the township, what is the best connection point within the region, and where you could potentially continue your trip on the GRT network? So option one looks at connecting it to Fairview Station, so bringing it north into Kitchener. Option two looks at a potential connection to Sports World Station. Option three looks at a connection into Ainsley Terminal in Cambridge, and then option four looks into potential connection into Conestoga College. And again, within each of these terminals, there are other GRT connections that you can make to continue your trip, with some of them having the ION service that's in place as well. So I'll take a pause here and I'll turn it back to Jacob, who is going to initiate another poll.
Good. So our next poll, of these options on the screen, which do you prefer? You can pick any of the four. You like them all, you don't like any of them, or they don't apply to you. So that is mostly if you don't live in Ayr, or you don't live along where any of the routes would be. So about a third of you do not like either of the routes, but almost a third of you like all the options. And then between the four options, the other third are picking between these ones. So Fairway is the most desired, or Sports World, and maybe less so towards Conestoga College and Ainsley Terminal.
Okay, so yeah, this is very good feedback in terms of sort of what we're hearing. And for those of you who did answer, I don't like any of them. As we do, we're going to open up to Q&A in a little bit. We're just going to go through one more set of polls and questions. But if you answer that because you think there's another connection point that would be more suitable, please let us know. Or maybe you answered it because you just don't support transit within the township and you just don't support any of these options. So it'd be good to hear if any of you identified that option because there's another connection point that you'd be more interested in seeing that isn't identified on this list. Okay, we turn to the next slide, Jacob. Okay, so this next slide looks at the potential for on-demand zones within North Dumfries. As I explained, I sort of talked to you a little bit about that on-demand concept and what that would look like. And this is where we may split up the township into various different zones. And that on-demand vehicle would provide an opportunity if you needed a ride, noting that that ride could be shared with your friends and neighbors in the same vehicle, that you could request a ride somewhere within that zone, and that vehicle would take you anywhere within that zone or to one of the closer transfer points to allow you to connect somewhere else. So if you're in the green zone or zone 5, that transfer point may be in Ayr if you want to connect somewhere else along that fixed route. Or if you're closer to the sort of the boundary of Cambridge, that transfer point may be the Ainsley terminal. So these are 3 zones that we have identified. Zone 4 is West North Dumfries, which is west of Highway 401 connecting to the Ayr fixed route, which may or may include part of New Dundee and Wilmot, depending on sort of what happens with that strategy. Zone 5 is that central area between Highway 401 and the Grand River, connecting to the Ayr fixed route and the Ainsley terminal. And then East Dumfries is east of the Grand River, connecting to the Ainsley terminal. So these are the 3 sort of on-demand zones that we had identified. So again, the question to you is, if you live or work or ever travel within each of these areas, does this on-demand sort of zone structure make sense to you, and is it something that you may use? So I'll turn it back over to Jacob.
Thanks, Dennis. I'm going to launch that poll now. Which of the on-demand options on the screen do you prefer? Zone 4, West North Dumfries, Zone 5, Central North Dumfries, Zone 6, East North Dumfries. You like all of them, you don't like any of them, or they don't apply to you. Which again would be if you don't live in an area where you would use it. All right. Of the options, a third do not like any of the options, about a third like all the options, and then between the rest of them, it's fairly evenly split between each of the zone options, so Zone 4, Zone 5, and Zone 6. And then some people it does not apply to. I'm also going to, there's a question that we got from Carla. I do not want to speak out loud, but I'm busy in the background. But a better connection would be Ayr down Northumberland to Roseville, then down Fisher Home. And not only would that serve Ayr and connect us to urban areas, but it also helps new development on Fisher Home and the Huron area. Wouldn't that make the most sense and be the most direct? Either Blair or Dennis, you can take that one.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Blair.
Oh, no, that's it is an idea, and looking at, as you said, there is a new stuff down Fisher Home that's being developed. It's part of what we would want to be looking at is the best connections into the urban area. We do have some other routes planned down Fisher Home and up in the Kitchener area, but it's not a bad option for consideration as another route that we could take.
Mayor Foxton has raised her hand, so I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you. Just clarify on demand, because it sounds, I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So let's say I call in and go and get an on demand. Then it comes and picks me up. Can anybody get on an on demand, or is it only the recipient that calls and the recipient is picked up again? You know, a lot of residents are concerned about transit coming into that municipality. Would another person be able to get on and come into North Dumfries when we use on demand?
So anybody that lives within or works within the on-demand zone, or just has a need to visit that on-demand zone, could request to book a ride. So it's really dependent on whether your origin or your destination is within that on-demand zone. The start or end point would be a connect. If you're traveling outside of that on-demand zone, you would have to transfer at a connection point that we had identified. So that could be the Ainsley terminal, it could be within air. What is that connection point?
So
it is open to anybody to request that route.
So what I'm saying, I'm not saying anybody that's from here, but let's say I take on demand and I go to Ainsley terminal, and then I go wherever. And then I pick up my on demand again at Ainsley's terminal to come back to North Dumfries.
Yes.
Can anybody get on that bus coming back?
Only if they have booked the ride. So if there are two individuals that have booked that ride, then that vehicle may pick up both of you at the same time. If you coincidentally both book that ride at the same time, but it's not just a walk-on service. You have to request the ride and get that ride approved before that ride accepts.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem.
Great. I believe that's most questions right now. So I'll throw it back to you again, Dennis.
Yeah, so while we're here, we talked a little bit about what are some of those service options, and we'll get into more about sort of general concepts about transit, and if there is a desire for transit, any comments you have on frequency, hours of service, things like that. But are there any questions of clarifications for sort of those two route concepts that we and those options that we presented for North Dumfries?
I'll unmute Mayor Foxton again. Nope.
Okay, so let's say this doesn't fly and we don't get transit into air. But my CAO and I have talked to the region before, and actually we've talked to the Minister of Transportation about a shuttle bus into the business area at the 401. And possibly coming all the way into Tim Hortons to allow them to do their staff as well, and then looping around to the 401 on a shift basis. Is that still an option? Could we still do that if we didn't have transit completely coming to air, but we took care of the business areas?
As far as I'm concerned, all of these are an option. So if we don't see a demand into air and the demand is solely within the business area, then maybe that's where we identify the service. So it's about serving the needs of residents and employees and seeing what we can do to accomplish that. That's
where I'm getting the biggest questions is for businesses that have shifts that are looking for that. And also, Daryl brought out our seniors like going to Kirkwood and that. I wonder if we could do the shift thing and have maybe a combination of a loop through to pick up seniors, but we'll talk further later. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, no, that's, and sometimes we introduce service. You could introduce it as a shuttle type of thing in the first stage and build up the demand and see where it is. And then over time, if the demand warrants, we could extend it further. And both in terms of distance where it goes, as well as the hours that it operates. So again, Sue, that's something we can definitely talk to you further about.
Perfect, thank you.
Right. Thank you. JJ, you're able to talk. You have to unmute if you have a question.
Hi. You keep referring to demand. At what point would you consider demand low enough? Or as a consultant, are you going to, as I took in my stats, run the stats so that the demand is such that you will say that there is a demand for it?
So no, we won't do that. We sort of identify what the overall travel demand is. We look at what other townships or rural communities may be doing and what level of demand that they're getting for service relative to the population, relative to their proximity to an urban center, relative to the various different destinations that are within the township and the need to travel outside. So we don't have a set number for you. Like a lot of this depends on the overall cost of the service, how much ridership we anticipate we're going to get, and sort of what is that sort of trigger point that may warrant some level of service. We also look at different service models. So if demand is low, maybe we stick to an on-demand service, or if the demand is even lower than that, then maybe the area doesn't warrant a service at all. So these are all things that we do take into consideration when we're identifying what are potential options that are in place.
Okay, and something else then. I know Daryl had mentioned retirement homes in Kirkwood. I work in the long-term care retirement industry. We provide buses for our residents.
Mhm.
So in terms of that, if a Kirkwood would have their own bus, then the demand would go away. So therefore that becomes off the table should that ever happen. And would you take that kind of thing into account, or
Yep.
how would that work?
We would definitely take that into account. So if there are existing mobility options that are in place that are serving the demand, there's no need for us to duplicate that demand, that need. So if you have any information about existing services that are in place, who they're providing the service to, what are the hours, what are the trip purposes? Can I take it grocery shopping, or is it only for activities? Any of that information is useful to us.
Okay, and the other thing too, I know when my dad was doing dialysis at the hospital, he was able to access, because of course he was a senior, basically at a very cut rate. It cost him like next to nothing to go to the hospital through subsidies that the government provides. Do you take that into account as well? That there's subsidies available to residents of Ayr that may have disabilities or seniors that could go to doctor's appointments or say the hospital? Do you take that into account?
Yeah, we certainly do, and GRT provides that service, and I will let maybe Blair speak to that.
Yeah, for dialysis, typically through our Mobility Plus service or specialized service. So those are the types of things we, along with this township business plan, transit strategy we're doing now, we are currently as well doing a business plan for our Mobility Plus services. So we will be we're looking at all that as well. And we're also doing one for our main business plan for our whole conventional transit system. So all those are being considered together and looked at what is the best way, the most effective and efficient way to provide the service to the residents of the region. And there's different, as Dennis was showing, there are different models that we can use, and we're not restricted to one or the other. We can mix and match them based on what will make the most sense in the short run as well as in the long run. You could do something now to develop up services. We've done that in the past. We'll develop services with one level of service, and then as the demand grows, we switch to another service.
So
Thank you.
In short, there is that service available for individuals with disabilities that are registered for Mobility Plus, and we do take that into account. That we're not duplicating that service that's already available. But when we're looking at demand, It is for other residents or employees within the township.
Thank you, JJ. Next we have Lee. You're able to talk once you're unmuted.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So I have like a couple of concerns. I generally agree with a lot of the other speakers about the types of changes that it would make to our town to bring transit into it. And considering that kind of all urban areas right now are experiencing more problems than ever before, this is something that we don't have right now. And I think that should be more brought into the perspective of this meeting, because with all the benefits there are, the problems that come along with it, and to give a fulsome report, you should talk about like these are the potential downsides and what can we do to mitigate these concerns. And when you presented some of the routes, like you talked about going to Ainsley Street, and that's exactly in the spot that I forget the person's name talks about, like that's where a lot of people are having trouble. And that's exactly what we kind of live in there to avoid. Or you talked about like the number one option was to go to Fairway. And if you ask me off the top of my head, where have the most murders and armed robberies happened in our region this year, it would be at Fairview Mall. So it's exactly, again, like what I don't want my kids to be around. And then the other thing that I think would be more fair to have as part of this presentation is just a outright question, like, do you support this idea at all? Because it seems like you're just presenting, here's all the options that you can choose between, but not having it doesn't seem to be clearly defined. And then finally, and maybe the most important one to me, considering that transit is more significantly taxpayer funded than it is fare funded, not having a concern of keeping the tax burden low, it seems like it really should have been one of the primary options. Because as a person who won't use the service but will pay for the service, I'm not really enthused about subsidizing businesses outside of town to get their employees in, because they don't want to pay for more expensive real estate in town, and now they want me as a taxpayer to pay to bus their workers in. Or the same thing for Tim Hortons. It's like they don't want to pay a rate that somebody that lives in town would take this job for, so I'm going to pay extra to bring workers into Tim Hortons. Like, I'm just not interested in doing that. And considering that the region's running double-digit budget like increases lately, like this seems like a solution in search of a problem, and we can't afford it.
Player, probably. Thank you for your comments, Lee.
Yeah, and again, as we said before, people are free to put in their comments into the survey. This process that we're doing now is looking at the service type of service and what it would take to do the service, where it makes sense to provide service on the assumption that there is a service. And most of the questions provided had an option of saying you didn't like any of the choices. So it's all there. In terms of the cost, that is something that will become part of the process and in the budget. And we will be looking at the things, and part of the reports that will be put together will be presenting what the costs are for this service. And that is where some of those decisions will then be made. And council, as I said before, it will be up to council to make the final decision from both through the budget process and then through approvals of the actual service that we provide. And we will present them with that, and that will form part of the basis of the decisions.
It just seems odd that as a ratepayer, so ultimately the person financing this project, that it's not one of the things that I'm able to comment on directly within this. It's like, yeah, there's going to be a cost to it, and we'll let you know what it is. And you know, as a person that runs a household, it's like anything, like if my kids come to me and say like, I want to join this club, then like, does it have merit? Yes. What's the cost of it? That's my next question. It's one of my top 3 questions. I think anybody that, you know, operates a budget would say, what's the cost of this, as one of their top 3 questions.
Yeah, but you noted the first thing is there merit in joining that club before you get to that? Right now, we're going through the process of deciding what makes sense. Is there merit in this process? Until we choose some of those options and look at them, we can't tell you what the cost is. We know what an hourly cost might be for some of these things, but we don't know what the cost, and there could be a different cost of running, say, a fixed route to Fairway versus going to Ainsley versus going to Sports World. There'll be a different cost for the different on-demand zones. So until we narrow some of that down, it doesn't make sense to go into great details with the cost element of it. That will be the next step of this, part of the next step of the process.
And I will just say one thing, there's that next round of engagement that we will have. So this is at the end of the engagement process. So when we get into the next round of engagement and understand what is that feasibility, what is that desire, if there is a desire, and what is and if there is that desire, what is the best service model that helps meet the needs of the township, we'll have that better understanding of what the requirements are, what the resource and costing requirements are.
Thank you. I will move on to Kayan. You are free to unmute. There you go.
There we go.
Yep.
There we go. Well, that was just a fun time. Yes. So I'm in a very unique position. I actually live in what we consider to be old air, and I work out at the industrial area. So I do appreciate the community of air and their comments, and I do agree with some of them. I have to admit, I do agree with some. And I may be wrong in this, and so I do, please correct me if I am wrong, but I believe that today our regional tax assessment includes busing. I could be wrong, and I'm putting my hand up to say that right away, but I believe it already includes busing. My question though is, you talked about, assessing the needs, and, we would put a route out there. So let's say we put a route out to the industrial area, and I go ahead and I hire 5 people based on the fact that I now have busing to the industrial area. And this is fantastic for us. I'm putting it out there. What is your stance? Is there a point at which you would come to us and say, we no longer want to do this anymore? What's our guarantee that busing will continue? And if it does not, what type of advance notice would we get on that? Because that could create havoc.
Lara, it's probably a good one for you to start with.
Yeah. One of the things is, in terms of any service, transit service, it can change. And what we want to do, develop a service that we can build upon and increase the ridership, which it becomes sustainable for any service we put in. We don't put a service in with the idea that we're going to cut it out anytime soon. We think that the reason we would put it in is that there's some legs to it, that there's some value in keeping that service going, and we monitor it. We look at it rather than typically, in most cases, when there are some exceptions, but in most cases, rather than just cutting a service, we would look at how we would modify it to try and look at it and deal with why isn't it providing as much results as we would hope for it, or that people thought it would be. So that's something that we would do, and we would work with those in the area to try and see how we can keep the ridership, provide the ridership that in turn keeps the service going, which helps those who currently use it, as well as the businesses who may want to use it as it can be a recruiting tool for for the business. We know that that's internationally, that's becoming more of a question that is asked at times, is what type of transit service is there to allow for employees to get to the different locations. Another quick thing in terms of the taxes and what you're paying for in terms of transit, the way transit is dealt with in the region right now, the 3 cities pay for the tax, pay for the transit services that they provide collectively. The townships are what's called area rated. And so the amount of the cost to the townships is based on the service levels that they receive. So right now, for instance, Wilmot and Woolwich have transit services into those areas. So there is a area rated portion of their regional tax base that is paid recognizing the cost for transit. North Dumfries right now has they have Mobility Plus service and our specialized service. And so that area, you get the tax base in North Dumfries includes a portion for that Mobility Plus service right now.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Like I said, I wasn't positive that I had my information correctly, but that's what I thought. So I do appreciate that.
That's fine. It is a concept that is that some challenge to understand fully.
Yeah,
even for us
for sure.
to get it understood.
Mayor Fox, I think, has a follow-up as well. So you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And you have to understand that in North Dumfries, Mobility Plus is available for anybody 65 years of age and older. You do not have to prove a disability. And that's unique to us and not the other townships. And also, I believe the rate is something, it's a taxi service, so a taxi picks you up and takes you to your destination and brings you back. And I believe it's $3 one way, or at least it was. Another thing you have to remember is the region is not going to spend money on a bus and transit if North Dumfries does not want it. So we have to be really clear on what we do want and what we don't want. And I need that response from the public. And then I will voice your concerns at the region, because it's the public's concerns. It's not my concerns, it's the public concerns. Or it's my concern as well, but I'm your representative. So I have to do what you tell me. And so we have to look at all the options and be objective. I have never heard of, now Wilmot has transit and Elmira's had it for quite some time. I've never heard of transient people or any problems with the transit coming into those townships. I will clarify that with the mayors because they will know, but they've never ever mentioned that it's been an issue, because we don't have the services that that the people are looking for. For instance, in Cambridge, they've got places where they can go get lunches and meals and stuff for free. And that we don't have that here, so we're not really where those people that are in need want to be.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm going to take some of the written questions that we have that they've been here for a bit. So first question, if the fixed route in air happens, have the logistics around 30+ minute delays from trains blocking Northumberland or the tight corner of downtown where trucks already cause issues trying to turn been considered? This might be a Blair question. But...
it's one of the, like anything, train movements and other movements will be part of any analysis we do for routes, and we'll look at that, and we have had that issue within the 3 cities in the past, and we've got that with some of the other routes. The Route 77 has had issues with at times, or like we've had to deal with that issue. I'm not saying that it's causing delays necessarily, but it's something that we'll take into consideration as we look at the route options. And thanks for noting that as well. It helps us to remember those things.
We have a question from Lee again, so you're welcome to unmute.
I don't have a question, sorry.
Oh, okay, no worries. Okay, I think that's all the current questions we have, so I'm going to move on to the next slides. Back to Dennis.
Okay, yeah, so this has been really good comment and feedback about, again, your concerns over providing a transit service within the township, those who support that transit service and require that accessibility, mobility, either for themselves or their neighbors or for employees. And again, we're taking all of this into account when we're trying to understand, what that demand would be, what that need is, or the desire is, and what that support would be and what it would look like. So in terms of next steps, if you go to the next slide, Jacob, again, I'll put this slide back up just to provide you a bit of a timeline about for our study. And right now we're going to complete this first round of engagement. And the community survey is online. It's available on the GRT website to provide some sort of direct feedback for North Dumfries that we request that feedback. So we encourage each of you to fill it out. We encourage each of you to send it over to your neighbors, your friends, your family. Whether you support the concept of transit or you don't support it, we still want to hear that feedback. And that's going to be online, and I believe until August 2nd. Once we get all that feedback in, we're gonna take it, and again, over the late summer, we're gonna sort of take a look at what that preferred plan is going to look like, recognizing that everything that we're going to hear and identify what are the service hours, vehicle requirements, the routing, costs, etc. And the early fall, we'll go back to a second round of engagement and present what the preferred plan is. Is there a preferred plan? What does it look like? Is it only the on-demand? Is it the on-demand and the fixed route? Or is it only the fixed route? So we'll take a look at what that could look like. And again, based on that feedback that we hear through the second round of engagement, we'll develop that sort of final recommendation and present it to Regional Council in the late fall. So that's sort of the next steps that we're going to undertake. We're working in concert with GRT staff who are sort of leading this strategy, and we're sort of here to support, and those are the steps that we're taking. Next slide, Jacob. So with that, and again, I'm going to once again open it up to any other general comments or questions that you may have that may not have to do with those proposed sort of options that we had identified. It could be, again, more commentary about support or non-support. It could be more questions around or comments on, if we provide a service, what time should it run, vehicle types, etc. So any sort of questions or comments that you may have, I'll sort of now open the floor once again to see if we can provide some good discussion.
Okay, I'm going to open up to Daryl first. So Daryl, you're welcome to unmute.
Thanks, Jacob. I just want to ask Dennis, how will this all be communicated to everybody in the community of the upcoming segments that you have just indicated there?
Yeah, so I'll say a few things, and I'll turn it over to Blair to sort of clarify, but in sort of similar ways that we're doing it now, there'll be some postings potentially on social media. It'll be available on the GRT website as well. And then Blair, I'm not sure if there are any other communication strategies that you'll be utilizing.
Yeah, because I had found out about this through Facebook, just browsing through Facebook the other night.
Yep.
That's how I came about this, yeah.
Yeah, and those were some of the social media strategies that we've been using to communicate it. So that's sort of one option, but we have several means of advertising it. Blair, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, Dennis knows a number of those things through the region's website, and through GRT's website. The North Dumfries, the township's website also had a notice of the meeting tonight, as well as we'll put, I presume we'll also, through them, also include it in any future opportunities through them as well.
So Blair, what you're basically saying is just keep your eyes open, right?
Right now it is, something, and we will look and we'll see if there's other ways. I'd like to suggest that anybody who's here, we could mail them if we got their, email them if we got some way of communicating with them, but I don't know without talking to my other staff how we best do that, but we can, if you send in even through the regions or through GRT's website, there's a comments form there, or in your comments, put your email address, and we would be able to try and communicate with you as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if Mayor Foxton's still on, but just in general, if Mayor Foxton still is on, if she could comment what the feeling amongst the community is towards this. Is this our first forum that we've had on this, or have you received other emails towards how the community feels about having this?
To tell the truth, I've been working on this for about 20 years because the demand, people have been reaching out a lot. Now times have changed. It's the next generation. Luke talked about, and yourself did, about certain types of individuals you did not want to see coming into air. And yet we had a home for drug addicts and alcoholics for a good 30 years in air when my kids were growing up and everything else. If you remember, they were on Piper Street.
Yep.
You know what you recall?
Yep.
And took us, and they've closed down because we didn't have any services here for them. We couldn't provide them with any help. I was going to ask Engage Waterloo Region if they would advertise this in the Air News, because as the last person spoke, Jacob, I believe, you have to, you put something posted on social media, and if you don't look at your social media for hours, you may never see that thing again.
Well, and there's a lot of older people that do live here in Air here that do not have social media and are not on the Facebook or even have internet, as a matter of fact, right?
That's right. So I would really ask that we put this on to the Air News. I reached out to them tonight through email asking if they'd come on board to watch this. If they didn't, I may ask GRT staff to provide some information for them, even just doing an article in the Air News, following up with the public. I don't want to spend the money on transit if my people don't want it. But the biggest demand I heard this year was people going to college and university. And the parents couldn't afford a car for them. They're already paying tuition and everything else. And getting the students back and forth to school. That was another one. And seniors going to trips, but Mobility Plus does a really good job of taking care of our seniors. Right. And we're very fortunate. We're the only one that gets Mobility Plus if you're 65 and over. The other townships, you have to be disabled.
So Mayor Foxton, I would surmise that you're a proponent of this instead of an opponent of this. So I just hope moving forward that you take everybody's opinions and everybody's emails, everything that you get, and just, be fair and be, towards everybody who, like, I'm totally against having it. But
oh yeah, and I hear you. And I'm not sure that what the public wants today is what they wanted 20 years ago. So that's why I need the Air News to find out, and I need to hear. I need to know. And I don't think the region will do it if they're going to lose a ton of money, and we're going to lose a ton of money.
Right. Yeah.
It's going to cost us, period. Transit doesn't make a profit.
Right. Like I think it was commented in here too before, I think it was by Lee, just saying that, like, he's a person that will never use it, and I'm a person that will never use it, but we would have to pay through our taxes. Right.
You're right. You already pay for Mobility Plus through your taxes. You're right.
And I agree with that. And it's for people who are 65 plus. But this is opening it up to transit for the whole community to use. Right. So, I'm a person who has through elections and stuff like that, people speak up, and I'll be one of the people who will speak up against it. But majority will rule, and I will agree with that totally 100%. So
well, thank you, Dale, but I'm not 100% for it either. I want to hear what the public has to say and what needs. I'm not hard and fast either way, unless the province wants to pay for it.
Well, then that's a totally something different, right?
That's right. I've already asked them.
I'm gonna have to move on to the next person.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I'll take one more voice question from Peggy. You can unmute. Yeah.
Yep, thank you. Actually, you know what? Daryl and Sue took the wind out of my sails. I was going to also suggest, advertising in the Air News. I think that is very important. I live in an area with quite a few older Air generation, and they do not subscribe to Facebook. So it's very important that we get this out, because to Daryl's point, to Sue's point, for the downtown core, we need to understand what is needed, and if we don't include everyone in our township, then we're not being fair. We're not delivering what is best for our overall community. That's me as my downtown Air community. Me as my employer and a person who employs people out at, the 401 corridor. I love the idea. I've got to be honest. I'm personally, I know I have a coworker on this call as well, and we are going to talk to our staff, and we're gonna interview everyone, and we're gonna talk about this, and we're gonna get their input on this, because I agree, if the need is not there, I do agree with that. We're gonna look at who we could have hired when they realized where we were. They couldn't make it out to us. Those types of things, and I feel like we're doing an injustice, because we all know things are getting more and more expensive. People need jobs. People want jobs. If they can't get to a job, then what are we doing to our communities? Right? You talk about Ainsley Station, and perhaps there's some people in Ainsley that we would not want to come to Air, and I'm not going to question that. But are those people that, had we had transit 10 years ago, that could have perhaps gotten a job, whether it would have been in Air, whether, any of our small communities, could we have assisted those people at that time? I don't know the answer, and I don't pretend to know the answer, but I'm only suggesting that if, as a community, as a region, if we have any sort of ability to help those who want a job to get to a job to provide for their families, I think we need to at least look at that idea. So as I said in the very beginning, I'm in a unique situation. I'm in downtown Air, and I work out in the other community. And I understand everyone's comments from downtown Air, and I recognize that, I'm probably thinking along some of the lines you guys are too. But again, as an employer, I look at the other side. So I just wanted to bring that up. And again, I think more advertisement, not just on social media, is really required if we're going to get good feedback, whether it be good feedback in the fact that we want busing, or feedback in the fact that we do not want busing. But I think it's only fair that we ask more people in the community, and the way to do that is to advertise in paper. And overall, thank you very much. This was amazing. And I look forward to the next one.
Jacob, just quickly before you move on, maybe what I can ask is, if anybody has any suggestions on where we could advertise, if you can include it in the Q&A chat. So we did hear a couple, but if there's any additional ones, just type it in, please. Sorry, Jacob.
Well, yeah, I was like, we should move on to the next part, because I'm just being cognizant of time. We're not nearly at 8. So thank you all for your questions and comments. If you have questions about engagement, we have another slide, but if there's other things you want to share, it will go into, you can use in the survey. You can provide these feedback we'll be sharing with GRT, and be considering in the upcoming engagement as well. And more costing stuff would also be considered in those elements of the strategy as we go into the final phases. And I'll pass it back to Blair.
Thank you, Jacob, and thanks everyone for participating today. We're grateful for your interest in the township transit strategy, and we do value your feedback. If you haven't already, please fill out the township transit strategy survey, which, as we noted, will be available until Friday, August the 2nd. The link is available in the meeting chat, and you can see it up on the screen right now. And you can go to Engage WR website, and you will see that as you'll see it. You can find it through there, as well as many other places for feedback for other regional issues. So if you'd like to see the options proposed for the other townships, you're welcome to join our session tomorrow, which is looking at Woolwich Township, or check out the web page, which offers additional information on how we're exploring solutions covering each township. And as we noted, there will be other engagement sessions coming up, and we will try and get as many different ways to inform people of that as we can. As a staff contact for other questions or comments, please contact Adam Fraser, one of our principal planners at GRT, who wasn't able to join us tonight, but he is the project manager for GRT for this project. So again, thanks again, and have a great evening, everybody.